John and Helen Fidler were married December 28, 1942. On that special day, they made a promise to love, honor, and cherish one another, and share a lifetime of days together. In the years that followed, they made good on that promise, creating a life committed to family, friends, working hard, and having fun. They built a home, raised a family, and went on vacation as often as possible. In their 60-year marriage, they have created a legacy of wonderful memories. It is truly a gift when two people can share the same memories and savor their reruns. We turn back now to some of their early years. Helen was born on February 9th, 1921, at her family home in Jay County, Indiana. Her parents were John and Lydia Bailey, a resourceful couple who worked hard to raise a family and keep their farm prospering during the Depression. Her mother, Lydia, was from a large family with 7 brothers and 4 sisters. As the oldest girl, she learned homemaking skills at an early age. She met John Bailey at a Grange meeting, and after they were married, they moved to his 80-acre farm in Bear Creek Township. Although it was rough going at times, John Bailey loved farming. He and Lydia raised chickens, ducks, rabbits, and milk cows, and grew their own vegetables. He had an orchard on the farm and was good at grafting trees, raising bees, and selling honey. At times he even took a job in town to make ends meet. Lydia was a good cook and made all kinds of baked goods to sell, often taking orders in advance. Helen and her brothers and sisters grew up on the farm where they learned about life and living off the land.
My mother was a great cook. During my school year, she would give me a violin and organ lessons. We had the old pump organ, and she would cook, do the cooking and trade food for my lessons. And Mom was a 4-H leader, and she learned us to cook, to sew, to can, and we had a lot of projects that we did. And she worked with us, and we'd have to rip and sew again, and if it didn't come out right, she'd make us do it over. She was real active in church and school. Whatever to be done, why she would help. And Dorothy and I sang a lot, and she'd play the piano or the organ for us. We had a lot of church activities. They'd come to our house and different various homes and have parties. And one night we was making French chewing with a group of kids, and they put after it was cooked, they put it out on the well pit to cool. And we went to get it. Dad had sneaked out there and took his fingers and made tracks in it. So we knew who had done it, though, because he was always teasing. And he raised tomatoes and sold to the canning factory, and then we all worked at the canning factory at one time. He put pickles up in barrels in the basement and sold to a little hamburger joint in town. They would dill pickles. And he'd make root beer and put it in the basement to age, and we knew when it was ready when it started popping the corks. And we always had big parties when we made sauerkraut. Aunt Daisy would come down and they would have a big deal out of it. make enough for her and the family and for us. And we butchered our own meat, and we canned it, or took care of it. We didn't have any refrigeration, and to keep things as cool as possible, we put them down the well pit. It was kind of cool in there in the summertime. And Dad milked cows and sold milk, and he had in the garage had a little room fixed in there where he pumped the water in, and just had the cool water, keep it till the milkman could get there to pick it up.
Helen was the second of 5 children born to John and Lydia. Her brother Orville was 5 years older, and Dorothy, Barbara Jean, and John Ward were younger. When they were young, John Bailey drove the neighborhood kids to school in his old Dodge, which had snap-in isinglass windows. They went to a one-room school at Westchester through the 4th grade and finished their school years at Bryant, a larger school with grades up through high school. In 7th grade, Helen missed almost a whole year of school when she crushed her heel in an accident on the playground. Her parents decided to hold her back that year, which put her in the same class with her sister Dorothy and John Fidler, the cute boy who sat at the back of the class. John Fidler was 7 months younger than Helen and had spent his early years on a farm just 12 miles north of Bear Creek. John was the first son of Jim and Coral Fidler. He was born September 24, 1921, at their old home place in Pike Township. Jim and Coral Fidler worked a large farm left to him by his parents. His mother Coral was an ambitious woman who ran an efficient home and was an excellent cook. She loved her family, worked hard to provide for them, and kept her young sons in line with the snap of her dish towel. Jim Fidler was a clever man with a keen wit and a photographic memory. He was also a great storyteller and loved a good laugh. When John was 2 years old, his brother Jimmy was born, and the brothers shared a wonderful childhood growing up on the farm, playing, working, and learning about life. John attended Green Hill School through the 2nd grade. It was a small one-room school in Pike Township. He also learned to hunt and trap at a very early age, and the boys helped with chores as soon as they were able. They raised a lot of cattle on their farm, but when the Depression hit, they struggled to keep it. In spite of all their efforts, when John was 6 years old, the family lost their old home place, and they had to move. Coral's father, William Journey, sold them his place down on the lot at a price they could afford. It was in a low, fertile farming area near the Limberlost River. Corn, wheat, soybeans, and oats were their main crops there. But they also had a large garden and canned their vegetables and butchered and preserved their own meat. They raised chickens, pigs, and used horses for working the land. Life there was an adventure for John and Jimmy, and hunting and fishing provided endless entertainment, as well as putting food on the table. Farming the lob was risky business, however, and some years the crops were lost to floods. When times were tough, the family had to use all their skills and resources to make ends meet. John's dad did what he could to provide for his family, including taking advantage of the opportunity to sell his homemade beer.
back in the 1930s, early 29 and 30s.
Is this during Prohibition then?
Yeah. And Dad was always making home brew. He liked to make his own beer. And Jim and I used to fill the bottles. There was we put a tube over the edge, you know, and we'd always suck it, get it started flowing, and put it down in the fill the bottle. Then you just squeeze it off and put it in the next one. And that was we enjoyed doing that.
So did you always do it in your bedroom then, or?
Yeah, right there. And then he'd take the beer, the bottles, and put them in a container and set them aside and let it age, what they call age it, you know. And, so actually when the Depression came along, money was hard to come by, he finally started bootlegging. Of course, that was Prohibition time, you know, and they was always kind of worried about what they called the feds. And lo and behold, one time they come out and raided us. They charged him for bootlegging, and Dad had to go to court. They didn't do nothing to him.
After that, John's dad took a job in construction, and John, who had always helped his dad with the farming, took over the responsibility of working the farm by himself. He was just a teenager, but remembers long hours of working the soil, riding their horse-drawn cultivators.
And I done the farming when I was a kid, younger than Zachary. Started when I was real young, we've done all the farming with horses. And
You mean pulling the plows?
all the plows. I've done a lot of them. We had a riding plow.
That planted, or did you have to do that by hand?
Had a drill. And pulled by horses. And then we had corn planters for planting corn. And after the corn would get up, we had a cultivator. Cultivated. Most of the cultivating I've done was with what they call a one-row cultivator. And they call it a wiggle ass. Sit on the seat like this.
You mean you do it? You do the motion
Yeah.
to move it as it's going down the road?
Horses, you know, you have a team, and you hold the lines, and you keep the horses in a row, you know, and wiggle it, plow, so he didn't plow it out, you know.
Life on the farm had taught John the value of working hard, being resourceful, and taking care of family. School and sports would also be an important part of his life. At Bryant's school, he would learn other valuable lessons and meet a special girl. Helen started school at Bryant when she was in the 4th grade. From junior high on, Helen, her sister Dorothy, and John were in the same class, and John's brother Jimmy was just a year behind them. The school at Bryant had grades up through high school and offered a full curriculum with sports, drama, and music activities. They completed their education there and have fond memories of their classes with Mrs. Ketchum, Marty Logan, Wayne Hafner, and other teachers who inspired them. They were involved in many school activities and were recognized by classmates for their many talents. Helen, her sister Dorothy, and Jimmy all played in the school orchestra and the American Legion Band, with Helen on the violin, Dorothy on the cornet, and Jimmy playing drums. John provided the transportation to performances. Helen and her sister were very close, and sometimes even dressed alike. They had beautiful voices and frequently sang together and performed at school and church events. Helen was also recognized as being the best artist in the class and created a portfolio of impressive drawings and paintings during her school years. Her carefully rendered drawings and delicate watercolor paintings give us just a glimpse of her talent. John was a good student, and especially liked learning about agriculture and math. He amazed his industrial arts teacher in junior high when he asked if he could build a boat for his shop project.
The weather in this particular area was low, and then what we call the lop ditch run down through that country. And we'd get rainstorms, big rainstorms, and it would flood and ruin a lot of our crops. When I was at school then, when I was in the freshman year, we had industrial arts, and so I decided I was going to build a boat. Because of the floods, you know, and of course when we was kids, we'd done a lot of going fishing in the river, Wabash River. When I built my boat in shop and school, I asked the principal, he was our shop teacher, I said, Mr. Logan, can I build a boat? He said, sure, if you want to. So it was an experience.
So did you design it, or did you find a design for it?
I designed it myself. It was a flat bottom, had a square front on it, and it was a rowboat. I read when I was a young kid, I read a story about The Girl Who Got Lost. It was a book written by Jean Stratton Porter. She used to live in Geneva. It was about this girl, her name was Elnora. So I named the boat Elnora. I don't think Marty Logan ever did forget that.
Was that must have been a pretty ambitious project compared to what the other guys were doing in shop class?
Oh, yeah. You know, they'd make door stops and little stuff like that. And here I had it was about 12 feet long. Maybe even a little more, I don't quite remember.
John was also an athlete and was on the Bryant Owls basketball team. The school yearbook describes him as the mighty fiddler, famous netman, and foot racer. He earned this title when he took first place in a local race, sprinting past almost 100 other racers. He and Jimmy also played baseball for their school and competed with other teams in the area. John and Helen graduated from Bryant High School in 1940 with their class of 18. They were involved in a lot of social activities with friends in high school, but didn't really date each other until after graduation. Near the end of their senior year, John, who was the only one who drove in their group, began offering Helen a ride home from school events.
playing with a Legion band, and Granddad was the only one that drove, so he took a bunch of us into the band to play in the band that night in Portland. And he took my girlfriend. She didn't play in the band, but she went along, kind of like his date. So in the meantime, in the afternoon, he took Betty home and come back, and that night he asked to take me home. So that was really the first time I went with him. And then he told my mom and Dad that he would see that I got home. When the spark flew, it was for a play at school that they picked a few people out to go up in a little room and make plans for the school play, or a senior play. I got up there and there wasn't any place for me to sit. So your granddad said you could sit on my lap.
Did you sit in his lap?
Yes, I sat on his lap. On Saturday night after we graduated, we was in Portland, walking down the street, and Granddad come in with his old Chevy, and I was on the opposite side of the street, so he just made a U-turn and come over there, and that was it for life.
They soon started going together, and were together from then on. After high school, John attended college in Fort Wayne for a short while, and Helen worked at the J Garment factory. They knew their lives would change, however, when Pearl Harbor was attacked in 1941, and America was drawn into World War II. They also knew the young men who were eligible for the draft would probably be called to duty. When the defense industry began calling for workers, John, Helen, and a group of friends and family left Portland, Indiana, looking for jobs. John's parents sold their farm, bought a house trailer, and went along too. They worked for a while at an ordnance plant in LaPorte, Indiana, and then all moved to Michigan looking for higher-paying jobs at the Willow Run Bomber Plant. Helen, Dorothy, Orville, Jimmy, John Bailey, and Jim Fidler all got jobs at the bomber plant. But they wouldn't hire John, as he was too near the draft age. Helen's mother, her younger sister and brother, stayed in Indiana to work on the farm. Helen and Dorothy were among the first women hired at the bomber plant. Helen worked as a riveter, assembling gas tanks for B-24 bombers. She was a real-life Rosie the Riveter, drilling holes, holding the bucking bar, and driving frozen rivets through the sheets of cold metal. Soon after that, John was drafted into the Army and Jimmy enlisted in the Navy. John was sent to Atlantic City, New Jersey for basic training. He was assigned to the Air Force and shipped out to Lincoln, Nebraska for training as an airplane mechanic. He and Helen had talked about getting married when the war was over, but soon realized they couldn't stand being separated that long. They missed each other terribly and wrote letters every day. After much discussion, they decided to meet in Nebraska for Christmas and get married there. As the time drew closer, however, John was a little nervous about the idea. "Hello, darling. You know, sweet, I'm still in doubt as to whether I really want to get married until the war is over. Darling, it's not that I don't want you. It's just that I'm kind of leery as to whether we should or not. I really don't know what to do. Honey, I'll tell you what let's do. You go ahead and get ready to come. See the doctor and all, and we'll make up our minds after you get here. What do you say? Love, John. P.S. Don't let this worry you too much. You can never tell what will happen. Well, those prenuptial jitters didn't last too long. Helen soon began making plans to take the train to Nebraska and asked her sister Dorothy to go with her. When the time drew near, she started getting excited. Dearest sweetheart, I got your letter and snapshot today, and I think you are simply the most wonderful person there is. Honey, I love you very much. I'll be plenty busy till Tuesday morning, and then I can relax when I get on the train, if I'm not too scared. Darling, I think of you all the time now. I can hardly wait. It won't be long now. Yours forever, Helen. Both of their families were pleased that they had decided to go ahead and get married. Coral and Lydia even helped Helen pack for her trip to Nebraska. Helen and Dorothy traveled by train across the country, arriving just before Christmas. John had made reservations for them at the Cornhusker Hotel. They got their licenses, bought rings, talked to the judge, and made arrangements for the ceremony. On December 28, 1942, they were married at the courthouse in Lincoln in a simple ceremony. Helen's sister Dorothy and John's friend Art Rawl stood up with them. After the ceremony, they had their picture taken and went out for a hamburger and cherry pie at the Walgreens drugstore. The next day, Helen and Dorothy got back on the train and went back to Michigan. 2 days later, Helen got the first letter from her new husband. My loving wife. Hello, darling. Isn't it grand to be married? I sure am glad about it, aren't you? Darling, I love you so. I just received your first letter since you became my wife. It had Mrs. John Fidler on it for a return address, and honey, that sure looked good to me. Darling, I sure got me a wonderful wife, and I think you're simply grand. You know I could love you till doomsday, and by God, I sure will too. Your loving husband, John. 5 months later, the young couple were weary of their separation and desperately trying to nourish their love with letters. Dearest sweetheart, gee, honey, I don't know why, but I've really had you on my mind all night. I want to be with you so much, and for some reason I missed you more tonight than I ever have before. Darling, won't it be wonderful when we can be together for good? I only hope this war news keeps coming in as encouraging as it is at present. It sounds a lot better. Well, darling, I could never find a better husband than the one I have. How about a real big kiss? Darling, I'm yours forever. As always, lotions of love. Your wife, Helen. In the spring of 1943, John came back to Detroit to finish his mechanics training and was then sent to an Air Force base in Richmond, Virginia. The newlyweds were determined not to be separated any longer, so Helen quit her job at the bomber plant and joined him there. When John got to his new duty station, he was assigned to work as a crew chief on the P-47 fighter aircraft. He and his crew of mechanics maintained the planes used for pilot training. John's assignments also took them to Norfolk, Virginia, where they rented a small house and Helen worked on base managing the PX. Although far from home, they stayed in touch with family. John's parents met them in Washington, D.C. for a visit when they were stationed near there. Those years were spent working, playing, making new friends, and doing their part for the war effort. Their group got together frequently, and as John puts it, there were some wild times. They enjoyed beach parties, laughed a lot, and drank their share of whiskey sours. They didn't know it at the time, but these were to be friendships that would last a lifetime. John's brother Jim and his Navy buddies also joined them at their house for parties when he came through town. Then, in 1944, when they were stationed in Wilmington, North Carolina, John and Helen decided they were ready to start a family. Soon after, they were thrilled to learn that they were going to have a baby. Helen made it through the months of morning sickness and the long, hot North Carolina summer. The anxious father-to-be prepared for the event by making baby furniture out of orange crates painted pink and blue. On August 14th, 1945, Japan surrendered and the war was over. The country celebrated the victory, and a month later, John and Helen had their own reasons to celebrate. On September 13th, during a hurricane, and after a long and difficult labor, their first daughter, Carolyn Diane, was born. The new family left North Carolina about a month later. Helen took Diane back to Indiana and stayed with her family while John finished his time in the service. When he got out of the Army, they moved back to Michigan. Within a week, John got a job at a local factory, and they began making plans to build a house. They bought 2 lots across the street from John's parents for $225, and within a few months had started construction on the first phase of what was to be a very unique, ever-expanding house. John's dad, his brother Jim, and Bob Houston all helped with the construction. They moved in just before Christmas in 1946, when Diane was a year old. They quickly settled into their new neighborhood and often got together with new friends and family for a few drinks and lots of laughs. In the meantime, John began moving up in his company as he was promoted first to mechanic and eventually to service manager of the new Lincoln Mercury dealership in Ypsilanti. Responsibilities were also increasing at home, as the young couple learned they were to be blessed with another child. On February 1st, 1947, Deborah Ann, a beautiful little blonde, came into their life. Debbie won their hearts with her sweet smile and her dad's little round chin. With 2 little girls under her wing, Helen skillfully assumed the increasing tasks of being a mother and homemaker. She always made sure her girls were clean and well-dressed, outfitting them in the latest fashions, especially for Easter Sundays. Now every time I look at you, the girls, however, had their own ideas of what was fashionable and loved playing dress-up with their friends. Their fun-loving, easygoing dad liked playing with the kids and giving them rides in his new Ford tractor. He even let them sit on his shoulders and style his thinning hair. With John's parents across the street and his brother Jim's family close by, they were able to maintain their family connections and frequently arranged family get-togethers and birthday celebrations. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins were always there for special occasions and helped to create a strong sense of belonging to a special family. If you do what I want you to. John and Helen always planned fun summer vacations, and grandparents and other family members frequently came along. Fishing was usually the primary activity for John, and when Diane was old enough, she tagged along too. Debbie didn't share their passion for fishing, but before a trip was over, she usually fell in the lake somewhere along the way. There were many trips to northern Michigan, to Eagle's Nest Lake in Minnesota, and to Canada, where they fished for smelt in Lake Ontario. One year, Helen's parents joined them for the first of their many trips west to visit the Grand Tetons, Yellowstone Park, and the Black Hills. The West became a special destination for John and Helen, and they would revisit it many times on their annual hunting expeditions. Summers were also a time for the girls to visit their grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who still lived on the farm in Indiana. They always had a grand time, collecting eggs, riding the tractor, bringing the cows in to milk at the end of the day, and playing in the hayloft. When attending family reunions in Indiana, they also realized just how large their extended family was getting to be. In 1954, a reunion of John's family was attended by 120 relatives. Shortly thereafter, John and Helen learned that they too would be adding one more child to the expanding family. On October 30th, 1955, their third daughter was born. Dawn Leanne, their spirited little redhead, would complete their immediate family and give them a brunette, a blonde, and a redhead, and give John a house full of females to keep up with. Dawn was a real charmer, with curly red hair and a sparkle in her eye. Early on, it was obvious that she had a special love for animals, and they would always be an important part of her life. John and Helen soon realized their quaint little house could no longer accommodate their growing family. Although they had added on to the house over the years, they began planning an ambitious remodeling project. They organized a construction crew of family and friends, and on a sunny weekend, they cut away a large section of their roof and added a second floor with 3 new bedrooms. This was their biggest remodeling project, and the one that would give their handmade home its unique form. As the girls grew older, Helen wished she could teach her daughters some of the valuable skills she had learned growing up on the farm. She organized a group of friends from the neighborhood and formed a local 4-H club, which they called the Suburbanettes. Through club activities, the girls learned to cook and sew and explored other subjects of interest. John also worked with the group, teaching rifle safety classes and supervising their target practice. They displayed their projects each summer at the Washtenaw County 4-H Fair. The girls had a lot of fun in 4-H and learned a lot too. Vacations and travel were always a priority for John and Helen, and in 1958 they invested in a new travel trailer. That summer, they took the girls on a tour of the New England states, camping along the way. Their little camping trailer was their home on wheels for many other fun-filled trips, including a memorable fishing trip to Canada in 1961. That year, a large family group joined the fun, and everyone got in on the action, cruising the lake, catching lots of fish, drinking, laughing, and swatting mosquitoes. The heavy stringers of fish were their reward for roughing it at their primitive campsite on the lake. The scruffy-faced brothers went home with tales to tell and good times to remember.
Come on, baby, rock me all night long.
Well, the adventure didn't stop here, but our movie must. John and Helen continued to provide a loving home and gentle guidance as their girls grew up and went on to follow their own path and create their own families. Their extended family now includes 9 grandchildren and 8 great-grandchildren. Adventure and job opportunities have carried these new families to all parts of the U.S., including Alaska, California, Florida, Tennessee, Washington, Ohio, and of course, Michigan. They all still feel a strong family bond, keep in touch, and enjoy getting together whenever possible. John and Helen have truly given their family a wonderful legacy. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Thank you for all your help and inspiration. Thank you for showing us the way and then letting us go. And oh yes, thanks for the memories.
Thanks for the memory of sentimental verse, nothing in my purse, and chuckles when the preacher said, for better or for worse. How lovely it was. Thanks for the memory of Schubert's serenade, little things of jade and traffic jams and anagrams and bills we never paid. How lovely it was. We who could laugh over big things were parted by only a slight thing.
I wonder if we did the right thing. Oh, well, that's life, I guess.
I love your dress.
Do you?
It's pretty.
Thanks for the memory of faults that you forgave, rainbows on a wave,
and stockings in the basin when a fellow needs a shave. Thank you so much.
First, I want to ask a question. The grandkids that live in this day and age with all the technology and every kind of gadget and whiz-bang doodah, what was it like without electricity? What was it like, Dan?
It was dark.
Dark, wasn't it?
thanks for the memory of cushions on the floor, hashed with Dinty Moore, that pair of gay pajamas that you bought and never wore.
Say, by the way, whatever became of those pajamas?
Huh?
Huh?
We said goodbye with a highball.
Then I got as high as a steeple.
Did you?
But we were intelligent people.
No tears, no fuss.
Hooray for us.
Strictly ingenue. Darling, how are you?
And how are all those little dreams that never did come true?
Awfully glad I met you.
Cheerio and toodaloo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.